Come join Melissa and her guests on the Chats from the Blog Cabin podcast. From North Carolina, this podcast will have you feeling like you've known these folks for years. Listen in as they chat about life, culture, current events, and more, all with a special Southern flair. Curl up with your favorite beverage and get ready to be entertained. Tune in now for a unique experience that's fun and insightful.
Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin. In this show where I virtually invite people into the blog cabin to chat about life. And Alexandra, welcome back to the show. You have a great site, Forward to Joy. I just love it. In this climate that we're going through right now, we really need to find some joy in life. So tell us about yourself, and then we'll talk about how we can find some joy and what's going on.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's so nice to be back here to chat with you. I just adore conversations. So I started Forward to Joy after my husband passed away. He died by suicide in 2020. I can't believe it's going to be 5 years. I'm still trying to come to terms with that. It's been 5 years. And I just realized with all the grief I went through and still go through, and really trying to figure out what life meant. That doesn't sound really great. Rebuilding, right? There's been so much of rebuilding and reevaluating what my life is about now and who am I and all these things. It was almost like his death kind of thrust me into an existential crisis. And out of all of it, what I found was there's got to be a way to connect with joy. There's got to be a way to still have meaning in this life. And so that's how I started Forward to Joy, is just a way to hopefully let people know you're not alone. We all have things, events, experiences we're trying to work through, and to really try and be a place for that connection.
Yeah, that's true. We all, everything, it seems like everybody has something. And it seems like we're so quick to blame others for what's going on in our lives instead of blaming, or not, I won't say blaming, but just know that it's just a part of life. And that people, they have to find joy in what they can find joy in. Now, you mentioned your husband dying by suicide. How, and I know at the time you were pregnant, or no, your son had just been born, correct?
He had just turned 1.
So how did you talk and find joy with your son in the midst of going through that grief?
Oh my gosh, such a great question. So at first I'll say I kind of did a little bit of the fake it till you make it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would try and do as much as I could. We had dance parties. We would listen to a lot of music, try and read funny stories. I fully admit we probably weren't outside and as active as I would have liked us to be. But it took a while actually for me to really recognize that what I was experiencing were moments of joy, because I also felt guilt over that. Like, my husband died. I can't have any fun. I can't laugh. I can't have joy in my life anymore. I have to be somber and grieve and just be miserable the rest of my life. I really thought for a while that was it. Like, I would say I was sentenced to this grief, and I don't feel that way anymore, but that's what it felt like at the time. And so one of the first experiences I had was actually taking my son to his swim lesson. And I realized I'm actually looking forward to this. And that's what it started to open up my eyes of, wait, I can actually plan something fun. I can actually do something and look forward to it and then enjoy it. And that had been just a foreign concept to me for probably a year and a half after he died, where I was like, no, I've got to be so somber all the time, which is not sustainable.
So how did you manage to flip the script to take what was a devastating event in your life and create something so positive out of it? Because I think a lot of people are needing to cling to that right now, and what's happening in our country right now is they need to cling to some kind of joy and make it positive. So how were you able to do that?
Yeah, so it was a little bit of falling into my lap and recognizing what was happening, and then also a little bit of actually intentionally trying to do that. And really what I found was I've always been a person where I've said, if I have to go through something to lessen the hardship for another person, let me be the person to do that. And so after my husband died, that was a big part. I wrote a book, a memoir about losing him and that whole process. And part of that was, if I can help someone else so they don't have to feel as awful as I do, then that will mean something to me. And it's finding that meaning out of tragedy, like finding that purpose. You and I have talked about, finding that purpose out of pain. How do you find meaning in your life after such a tragedy. And so that's where it kind of just came to me one day, and I was like, what is it for to joy? Okay. And it just kind of stuck. And I thought, yes, I got almost, it's like I got the title first and then said, yeah, no, this is something that I can actually hold on to. And that kind of became my anchor, because once I felt a moment of joy, I thought, oh, this feels really good. I want to feel this again. And then had to explore how else could I find that, which is different for every person. And that's kind of that exploration piece.
And plus, too, feeling the joy without the guilt. Because I know a lot of people feel that joy, but then they're like, oh, I shouldn't be feeling the joy because and there's external influences that actually make you think, well, why are you feeling joy right now? You should be feeling guilty, or you should be still be feeling sad. How do we like sound out and drown out those noises?
I think a big part of that is actually through healing. And so I know for me, to be able to really embrace the joy, I had to work through some of my feelings around my husband's death. And that included looking at, okay, often you will hear people say, oh, they just want you to be happy. Your loved one who's passed, they want you to be happy. And it took me a while to really think, like, really? Is that really something on their mind? Well, they don't have minds, spirits don't have minds. Yeah. But it took me really being able to go through and to think also to separate his death from myself and a life that I still had. And so in general, what I would say with that guilt is really understanding, where is that guilt coming from? What is it? For me, it was being a people pleaser. So I knew that I was worried about what other people would think. I was worried how other people would react. And then I had to say to myself, this is my life. And I understand other people are going to make choices, but this is the choice I'm going to make. And if this feels right for me and it makes me feel better, then I'm going to do it in a healthy way. I usually say, like, make sure whatever you're engaging in is healthy. But I had to separate it and say, like, it was really that people pleaser and my concern, because people will, especially if you're dealing with feelings of anxiety or fear or grief, it's very easy to project that onto other people. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it was really teasing it apart and saying, where's this guilt coming from? And then addressing that to say, no, it's okay. I can have moments of joy. I deserve this. And it doesn't mean anything. It's a yes and, right? It's not black and white where it's one thing or the other. It's, I can still be sad and I can have moments of joy.
And speaking of that, how do we go with what's going on in this country? How do we separate the guilt of, not doing enough or not speaking up enough or in grieving as well of what's happening in our country of, these people that are being disappeared off and people can't find them. How do we deal with that? How do we externalize or internalize that grief or show that, because I know a lot of people are grieving right now, and especially a lot of kids are grieving because parents are and I've seen reports where kids are being taken out of foster care and they're being sent into places where if they're in foster care already, that there's circumstances beyond their control that placed them there to begin with, and then to turn around and take them from some places probably they've only known love from and put them someplace else. So how can we as parents address that with our kids? Because, you try to hide your kids, shield them age-wise or age-appropriate, but they're still going to hear things. They're still going to see things. So how do we as parents, and how do we deal with our grief as well?
That's such a loaded question and so good. Yes, it's so hard. One of the things I would say is it's really easy to get caught up in, I should be doing what other people are doing. So if people are protesting, I should be protesting. If people are calling hotlines, I should be calling hotlines. I don't really agree with that whole thing. You and I have kind of talked about this. What I would say is find what you can do to educate or to stand up and be that agent of change in your own way. Going to a protest is not for everybody. Maybe sharing on social media isn't for everybody, but could you open up your home and have a group of people that can come and connect, and that's a safe place that people can talk about what's going on for them without there being judgment, without having fear that someone's going to make a phone call and try and have someone disappeared. What can you do when you're talking with children? I think it's perfectly reasonable at an age appropriate level to talk about what's going on and say, some people are losing their homes and some people are losing their parents, and they're losing, their families are being ripped apart because of the color of their skin. And that's wrong.
Yeah.
Like, and being able to teach kids. I'm a big fan, and Melissa and I think you and I align on this a lot. I teach love and acceptance and understanding that people come from different backgrounds. People are going to have different cultural experiences, and yet how we're still humans, and how can we connect? I call myself a humanist. How can we still find that connection? And I think for kids, it's okay to recognize that it's a scary time. They might, depending on what's going on for that particular child, they might have friends who they can't be friends with anymore, or something happens to them. I think it's being able to have those awareness conversations. And then when those fears come up, I think the other thing is to say, we'll figure it out. Now, I say that knowing that with the current climate, figuring that out might look different for everyone. That one, I will say for me, that's probably been the hardest, because I do feel like the normal channels that people could access and use for advocacy are not available to families right now. And so I think there is a level of being like, that's an unprecedented time for us in this generation of what is happening.
For sure. I mean, and plus too, maybe if they're feeling anxious or fearful, direct that fear into something positive. Like maybe, oh, we'll stop and we'll color, we'll do paintings together, or we'll go outside and play, or we'll, spending that time with your child, blowing bubbles. What child does not like blowing bubbles? I mean, seriously. That to me seems like it make them aware, but don't make them aware to the point that they're hating the people that are actually coming in and doing stuff, because that's where I think that's where the divide is the hate. Like you and I talked about before, there are such great people on both sides of the thing. It's just, unfortunately, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, and the squeaky wheel is the loudest. And unfortunately, you hear that. There are people on both sides, because I come from, and I've got to put this out there, my dad was a cop. So, I come from a background. My dad was a Marine and a cop. So I'm going to support the police, because in my mind, the police is my dad, the way he was. But I know that there are not all police officers that are like the way my dad was, the community policing. And so, but it makes my heart just happy when I see these videos on social media. And that's another thing we can talk about in just a second, where the cop, when he's driving through a neighborhood of a very, diverse culture, and all the kids of every diversity comes up and runs up to him, Officer Tommy, how are you doing? And like he'll, and then you can see cops that are seeing kids running around and they're doing a race. And I saw this on social media yesterday. That's why it's stuck in my mind. And this one lady got out of the car, the cop did, I think it was in New Zealand, and she did a race with the kids. And then she was like, Keter, Micah, I got one running on me, just kind of playing around. But the humanity in it. And I think that's where we're getting away from, is not seeing humanity in people. And we need to start seeing humanity again. We need to go back to the basic truths that our country was fought for.
Absolutely. And I agree. But what we're missing is that understanding of that, where people are trying to figure out life. And again, we all have those differences, and like we were saying, but you don't have to fear those differences, and to be able to create that sense of unity and come together, and knowing that our skin color is just an attribute. It's not our identity. It doesn't say something. One of the things that you and I have discussed prior is this idea of like, yeah, there are going to be people who are going to be criminals, but you're going to have all different kinds of skin color. Like, you can't say that one type of skin color, it's just, there's too much variety to try and create one sense of a policy for all of that. And I love your idea of trying to make it positive and take that fear, be nurturing, be available so that you can answer questions. And if you don't know how to answer questions, then, I will say ChatGPT, go the AI route, there are lots of resources to be able to figure out, how do I answer this question to my 5-year-old? How do I answer this question to my 10-year-old? But to have that honesty, because kids will feed off of our own energy. If we're anxious, they're going to be anxious. And if, there's going to be a level of that anyway, but it's how to work through it almost together rather than just try and isolate them, because all that's going to do, and this is something that I've learned even through the grief process, is if you are not concrete with your children, they will fill in the blank. They will come up with their own stories about what is going on. And so I think I've always been kind of a straight shooter anyway, but like just, be honest in an age appropriate way. And they are hard conversations, and they're conversations that probably you could look at and say, I don't even know why we have to have this. Like, you're too young to have this conversation. And yet this is what's happening currently.
But how do we do it in such a way that we don't create hate or divert more diversion than this country needs? Because I think right now the line is actually, I'm hoping from everything I've seen, the line is leaning more toward love than it is hate. How do we keep that to make sure that that doesn't invade our homes?
Yeah. I think that whole love-hate divide too is difficult as well, because, and again, as we're finding, nothing with this is super straightforward. I think one of the things, and even what you've mentioned, Melissa, and I think that's a really good point, is that some of these people have a job to do, and families have different rules and they have different ideas. And I think it's coming to an understanding that families may have different ideas, and they might conflict, and they might be different than the ideas that we have. And still you can disagree, but you don't have to hate someone. You don't have to want them to hurt. You don't have, early on in this process, I think I had seen a clip of someone who basically had said, if people don't align with how I'm thinking and the group that I'm following, then the message is the people who don't agree need to die. And I was so struck that I'm like, 2025, this is happening. Like, I was very kind of surprised by that. And it took me a while to go, that person is allowed to have his beliefs, but I know that what I want to share is that to me is not okay, that other people should die. Like, you can have your differences, but that doesn't mean you want to harm someone. It doesn't mean that you want someone to lose their house or their job or their sense of family. It is okay to disagree. And I think, to me, that's what's the biggest thing, is there's been a culture of, if you disagree, then you need to hurt, and I'm going to hit you 10 times harder, and I'm going to annihilate you, whatever it is, I'm going to come after you because you disagreed. And I think that we're a country that was founded on discourse. Why not be able to hopefully, I'm hoping, bring it back to that?
I saw a post today talking about George Washington and how after 2 people wanted to make him king, and he didn't. He said, no, I don't want to be king, because he said that's what we fought against. And after 2 terms, he says, okay, it's time to turn the country over to somebody else, because he knew what was best for the country. And it just struck me that if someone who's our very first president of the United States could know what was best for our country, and to know that kings and division was not going to be the best thing after he just fought the war, that, why aren't our political leaders more standing up? And actually, I want to point out that this was a political leader that posted this. I'm going to shout out to him because I have so much respect for him. Senator Cory Booker. If you don't know who he is, he's the one that broke the filibuster for the most time talking in Congress, because he's a senator, which was held previously by someone who was trying to disagree with the anti-segregation. He wanted segregation to continue. So the fact that here's a Black man from New Jersey who was able to break that record it's just awesome. But he actually posted that, and it was like really thought-provoking, because you think, wow, someone who was looking out for the whole country and not just certain parts of the country. So how do we tell our kids that there are great leaders to look up to, and there are great things happening in the country, and there are people like police officers and immigration officials and government officials that we can be safe with, but still in such a way to tell them, okay, caution as well, because you never know what one you're going to run up against, because it's grief. You're grieving because the way, we talked about this before, the way you and I have grown up is totally different than the way our kids are. Well, my kids are all grown now, but still, they're young adults. They're not even 30s yet, in their 30s yet, and still trying to process how we grew up to the way our country is now. It's hard. is hard because as parents we grieve of the freedom that our kids have, because I know you probably know where your son is at all times, pretty much, where, his friends, exactly where he's going, A, B, we're all cautious about, because we hear about kids being taken and everything else. How do you as a parent sit there and go, okay, these are the leaders that we stand up for, but not because they're standing in hate or they're standing in division, but because they're standing on what's right.
Well, I think you answered it just nicely right there. Because I think what comes to mind is exactly that, is being able to say here, and again, I'm going to use this because there are certain news stations, right? You kind of walk into a house, and I work in an industry where I go into people's homes, and there are certain news. If certain news is on, you kind of have an idea of where people fit. And you go into another house and you have certain news on, you're like, kind of know where people are are going with that. But I think it's just not only just following those leaders, but what is the main theme in morality and the value? What is the value that we're teaching kids? And that is going to be dependent on the family. But I think to your point, like, here are the people, I think it's the understanding. Here are some people who were leaders, and they were leaders because they were very charismatic and they also wanted to hurt people, it turned out. And here are some leaders who weren't. The discernment piece, I find, I don't know that I have an answer to that, of how to be able to tell. I think it's to say, be polite, answer questions honestly, do what you can. And also there's like a awful understanding of you could do all the right things and something could still go wrong. And that in itself, I think, is just kind of terrifying. But I still encourage to have that foundation of, if you need to, like where I live, they have these evenings where they'll have fire trucks come out and you can meet all the firemen and you can explore the truck, and they do little carnivals. You can do that with police too. So I think it's good for them to have that if it's culturally appropriate and if you feel safe to do it. Where I live, you can. I know there are some places that wouldn't happen and you couldn't do it. So I think it's finding I know this is vague, but finding what works in your environment in order to have that teaching moment. And I don't know that it's really possible to earn that discernment unless it's to teach kids to trust themselves and trust what their bodies are telling them about situations, because kids have amazing spidey sense. So it's like teaching them to trust themselves and what they feel is right or not right.
You just said spidey sense, which in my mind made me think about the Avengers and everybody and how everybody's different, but they all work together. So that would be such a great teaching tool for kids, because if most kids watch read the comic books or see like the Incredible Hulk and the cartoons and the books and the movies, they've seen them all. So you tell them, talk about that, pull that in. The teacher in me is coming out right now. Pull that in and show them, hey, you know what? Their skin color, the Hulk is green. I mean, when do you see a green person in the world? But look how he fought for good, So show them that just because somebody's different doesn't mean that it necessarily means that they're bad.
Exactly. And I think kids don't have as much of that conditioning that we do as adults. And that's why I usually say as adults, if you really want to teach kids, you have to really reflect and be aware. What are your own biases? What are your own prejudices? What are you bringing to the table that you might be, if you see something, I'll say that, my son has a good friend and he, his parents have let me know where they stand politically, and it does not align with where I stand politically. And I had to sit there and go, okay, how do I feel about this? What am I going to do with it? And at the end, I was like, they haven't harmed me. They haven't harmed my kid. My son is still good friends with their son. There's no reason for us not to be friends. It hasn't gotten to a point where I've said, ooh, this is not this. There's a way that we can coexist. There's a way that, and we used to.
That is so true, because when you think about it, even if they don't align politically, if they're not pushing their views on you, are trying to make you change, or being outright irate about it, well, I can't believe you believe that, then we should be able to coexist, because that's what this country was founded on. And I remember seeing back in the social media post, I talk about social media a lot because I'm on it a lot. I have an addiction where this man was up. I don't know if he was a House of Representative or he was a senator, but he was a Sikh, which, is a Muslim. They wear turbans and things like that. And he was like up there doing the prayer. I think it was the House Representatives. And somebody's like, why is he doing a prayer? He's not a Christian. This country was founded by Christians. And one of the few times I actually commented on, I'm like, this country was founded because people were trying to get free of religious persecution. I'm like, he has a right for his freedom of religion. You have a right to believe in what you want to believe in, so why is it different because he's standing in the House of Representatives giving a prayer? Why is it different than if you go out in the street somewhere? If you have a right to share what we want to share, to have our voice be heard in the protest. And so that really bothered me because I'm like, you can't stand on the values of what America's made on, like we have to teach our kids, and then turn around and say only if the values suit what I want for this country.
Yes, the hypocrisy. That's one of the things that it's okay, everything is okay as long as everyone believes in what I believe. I was struck by a story. This happened a few years ago where it was during COVID and my son was at a daycare. And for a while, right when everything happened, the daycare closed for a little bit. And his daycare provider came to me, and the whole idea, and I'll say this story includes a conversation around vaccines. And this isn't me being pro or against vaccines. This is just to show an example. And she let me know that her family, they were not interested in getting a COVID vaccine. They were concerned about the impacts for their family. And I ended up saying, well, I am going to get a vaccine for the same reason, because I am concerned about the impacts for my family. And it was one of those moments, and I think this happens a lot, where I realized we are making a decision, two very different decisions, but we're coming at it from the same place. She was making a decision for her family that she felt was best. I was making a decision that I thought was best. And I think those increase of those experiences happening have caused a division where it's like we can't come together. And I'll say in that particular situation, it did create a bigger divide, but it led me to a better understanding, because so often I would be like, I don't understand. I don't get it. Like, why would you target people who have brown skin? This doesn't make sense to me. And then I also have to take a step back and go, for whatever reason, maybe individuals feel that this is what's best to protect their family. And I ardently disagree, that I don't think that's a way to, So I think keeping that in mind too can be helpful. It doesn't necessarily mean that's going to create more connection, but I hope it could create more understanding, because so often I think with the division that's happening right now, it's just very us and them, and really getting to a point of understanding that people are just trying to do the best that they can, and they're entrenched in their beliefs. And so that understanding, though, I will say, doesn't mean that I'm always 100% in having those relationships, because absolutely, if someone is claiming that another person should die for their beliefs, then I'm like, okay, I wish you well. I hope, but I cannot be friends. Exactly. Like I can't.
Bye, Felicia.
Exactly. Can't have you in my life, but I can understand that we can coexist.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think that's where people are thinking that people can't coexist, because people are taking resources from us because of the fear mongering. So how do we get away from, because fear mongering also brings grief in, not only for the people that are in anxiety, not only for the people that are being targeted, but also for other people as well, because they're like, oh, well, if I go to the grocery store and I talk to someone that's not like me, am I going to get in trouble? Like back in the 60s, if like Emmett Till was a great case for this. If you're not familiar with Emmett Till, he's the little black boy that was killed, murdered, because he supposedly talked to a white woman in the store. And so at that point, how do we tell our kids it's okay to talk to our friends? It's okay to have these conversations with people that look different than us, and don't be scared, even though what's happening in this country is putting fear and anxiety into us, and we're grieving, and parents are grieving over the loss of what the country was as we grew up. And every generation, I think, grieves a little bit more because they see what it was like my childhood was different than my kids' childhood because they had social media. I didn't have social media. And I was just thinking about it, oh my gosh, the internet actually happened in right around the time I had my first daughter. I mean, it's not been around that long, so everything grieves. There's things that we grieve, but there's also positive things that come out of it as well. So how do we as parents, and then in turn as kids, make that so that it's a positive experience and not a negative, and don't instill that fear and anxiety into us?
Yeah, that's another loaded question. One of the things I was thinking of, and I think this could help with that, is I feel like also right now we have this kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? But basically, I feel that a lot of the fear that comes around is from a personal perspective. People are coming after my job, my house, my community, my livelihood. That seems to be, I think we've deviated away from that community of we are here together. I'm so grateful. I live in a neighborhood with my neighbors. If I need anything from them, I know that they are right there. We have this little community, and I've even thought of relocating. And I'm like, I don't think I would find neighbors like this. And that's not. I think what I have is a little rare. That right, everyone just blinders on. You just do you do you, and we've gotten to this point. And so I think because there's been this. And it's worked, right? It's worked to create this idea of you're trying to come after me. You're trying to come at someone cuts you off. My trip to the store is not as important as yours because you cut me off. Like that, right? That's ridiculous, but it works. And it's gotten people to a point that we've isolated ourselves, at least here in the US, I'll say, right? Talking just in our climate here. And so I think if we can just take those first few steps of branching out, get out of your comfort zone. I think a big part of this is going to lead people to have to get out of their comfort zone and teach kids it's okay to get out of their comfort zone and to go do something. And it's okay to still be friends with people who look different than you. It's okay that someone might believe differently than you, and to create that sense of community. Because when we start to, there was even a scenario where my son was being picked on by a kid on one of his baseball teams, and this kid was just not necessarily a bully. He was kind of on his way to being a bully. And I remember being like, I just want to isolate my son, not have him around him, just be like, nope, that kid is trying to, ruin baseball. That's such strong terms for T-ball. But I think it's like being able to take those moments that happen, and instead of that knee-jerk reaction, of moving to a response of let's engage the child more. Let's have a talk. Let's figure these things out, rather than have that quick knee-jerk reaction. You're coming after, it's defensive, right? We're defensive. And so I feel like with kids, and you're right, social media just perpetuates stuff. You can find really good things. And so I think just as adults, setting that example of being able to overcome that, over our own fears, our own frustrations, and that knee-jerk reaction, to maybe take those opportunities as a point of community and see if we can start to bridge that gap very slowly, to find those positives, to say, oh, that kid, gosh, I'm sorry he was picking on you. That's such a bummer, but let's go talk to him. Let's go engage him a little bit, or engage his parents a little bit.
Yeah, and it also will have to add that the way you approach things as well. Because if you approach with your back up and ready to fight, people are going to fight right back at you. But if you approach them like, hey, you know what? This situation's going on. What can we do together to make the situation better? Because there was one of the instances, I know this for a fact, my youngest daughter, who was really sick at the time, was going through elementary school, and her principal was not the kind of principal that you approach with a problem negatively, because she would have come back at you negatively. She would come back at her staff negatively. So I went to her and I said, and I worked for her, so I knew this. And I said, hey, Gracie's struggling. What can we as a team, me, you, and the teacher, do to get to where she needs to be? And she was super sweet. And people were like, she did that? I'm like, yes, this is because it's how you approach her. You can't approach with accusations and criticism right away, because people don't like to hear anything negative about themselves, so they put their backs up.
Yes, and what you're speaking to is what I call reading the room. I have been around quite a few people who will say, nope, if I have something to say, I'm just going to say it, and you've got to take it because I've got something to say. And I will be like, whoa, you can still, like, there is nothing wrong with understanding how someone is going to receive your information.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a big fan of like love languages and getting into how people communicate, because I think when you can approach someone, again, you being able to do that made it not about you. It was about Gracie and about being able to come together as a team to figure out how to best move forward rather than making it a personal attack against you. And that's that personalization, I think, that's happening, about over personalization. And so understanding, like, okay, this is the goal. The goal is outside of me. There are all these other people. We all have different communication styles. We all have different backgrounds. How can we communicate in a way to come to the center, come to the middle, and hopefully effectively do something? Because I do believe you're right. I think a lot of times people, their hackles are up, they're ready to go. They're like, you're coming after me.
Yep.
You know, and it's like, not necessarily. Maybe some people, right? Obviously, in what you and I are talking about, this isn't going to work 100%. But if you take the time to prepare and slow down and check in with yourself of like, why am I getting triggered? What do I need to do to be able to effectively? I just had this happen the other day because needed something fixed. I needed a tire on my car. It was a whole big thing. And my brother had to give me a ride to the tire place. And he looked at me and I was like, I am really upset because it took longer and all of this stuff. And he looked at me and he's like, okay, just saying, like, if you want to talk to them, you might just want to simmer a little bit, you know, just remember, be cool. And normally it would make me fire more. I'm an Aries, so I'm always like ready to go. But it's that whole saying, you know, what is it? It's better to do with honey than vinegar. Do you know that saying? The point is,
yeah. About flies or bees or flies. I know. I'm going to find it and I'll put it in the show notes.
My whole point is, if you come, and I've had to learn this the hard way, but if you approach someone from a place of love and like understanding, and that's what I had to do with the tire guys. You know, I just said, here's why this is frustrating for me. And we were able to find a really good solution. He was much more willing to listen to me than if I came in there and was like, here's what I'm going to tell you why you guys are like totally messed up and this is ridiculous, you know. To your point, it's all about that approach too, and being able to check yourself and have that self-awareness.
Which brings me to the next question. How do we take what is going on in our country right now and tell the kids that some adults are not acting adult-like right at the moment because they're seeing this being modeled and they're like, okay, so this is how adults act? I mean, I've seen 2-year-olds have better temper tantrums than some people in our country right now.
I almost just said that too. Yeah, I'm so glad you said that because I'm like, how do you explain to children that sometimes adults have tantrums? Yeah, we do. I think just that, you know, I think it's teaching them that there is a whole gamut, there's a whole variety of what you're going to find. And again, just honing on and what your own values are, and then saying people aren't going to do it. And you're right, it's wrong and it feels icky. For me, I was a hypersensitive kid, very, very, very sensitive. So even like even now watching news, sometimes I'm like, oof, I can't do it. I have to get snippets here and there because it really impacts me. And I see that in my son. And so I try and explain certain things, and he wants to question and know everything. He wants to know everything. And so I have to be really careful, but, you know, choose my words wisely, and then have to sometimes explain, like, some people are just mean. Some people actually do want to, and they're doing it out of fear. They're doing it from their, right? I project, obviously, I don't really know their own reasons. But to say, like, yeah, sometimes people are not nice. And one of the things I love, I heard this on a podcast once, and I think it was Reese Witherspoon who was speaking, but she was talking about friendship. And she said, a third of your friends are going to lift you up, a third aren't going to do anything, and a third are going to pull you down. And I love this. And I've used this even with my son, he'll be 6 soon, of saying, you know, is that kid lifting you up or is he pulling you down? And how does that make you feel? And I think now, just thinking about it as we're talking, allowing kids to have emotions is so key through this whole process. You got to let them feel the feels and navigate those feels and find ways to navigate them.
Yeah. And then emotions, but healthy emotions, I should say. We should add that in because if you got that hate and unforgiveness in the emotions, that's not going to be healthy for the child. And it's not going to be healthy for the parents either.
Exactly. So I think, you know, with that, I think hate will come from anger that's not addressed and, you know, feeling potentially not seen. I'm a big fan of Dr. Dan Siegel. He has a book called, well, he's got The Whole Brain Child, and then he has another book called The Power of Showing Up. And he talks about that as kids, we need the 4 S's: to be seen, soothed. No, this is going to happen. Seen, soothed, secure, and there's a 4th one. And the idea of being seen for me, I'll have to get those for you and we can add those to the show notes. But the idea of being seen, to let kids, for me, when hate comes, it comes from like feeling bad about yourself in a difference that exists. So, you know, it could be like, I hate that kid. Oh, well, that kid rejected me. So now I feel bad about myself. So now I don't like him. And of course, you know, hatred at higher levels can also be, kids can be exposed to and seeing that in adults. But allowing kids to be seen like, oh, that hurt. It hurts to be rejected sometimes. And being able to allow them and walk them through those feelings and to work through them so that we don't get to those unhealthy places where they're not willing to forgive, where they do, you know, cut other kids out or, you know, it's like that. I feel some pain, like I feel these big emotions and I feel pain. And so now I want you to hurt because I don't know what to do with the pain I'm feeling.
Yeah, for sure. And then plus 2, how do we, I had a question while you were talking and my mind went blank right now. But how do we, as, you know, as parents address that? Okay, you may hate such a strong word that maybe we need to say we dislike something. Because
exactly.
When the hate has that stigma of, oh, you hate everything across the board. It's such a strong, violent word. But the word dislike is a lot better. I mean, it's allowing the kids to have the feelings, but not allowing it to have such a volatile impact on their life. And, you know, you can, like, for instance, like sometimes I look at my husband, I'm like, I love you, but I don't like you right now because of the conversations. You know how it goes, but that's something that we need to reiterate with the kids, that we love this person. We love them because they're a part of what God created for this earth to be, but we just don't like what they're doing at the moment.
Yeah, and what you're doing is you're making a distinction between the being and the behavior, which is so important because kids will internalize and personalize everything. That's just their nature. They're very black and white thinkers. And so you have to teach them. You have to guide them. And it's okay to teach them that an adult may say things or have feelings that a child will have different, and it's okay to have that separation. You know, these are adult things. These are the way that an adult's going to handle them. This is how a child can handle them. But they have to be taught, absolutely, because I think their feelings can be so strong and they can get overwhelmed, you know, big feelings, that it comes out like that. But you're right. It's teaching them how to gauge that. Like, I don't think that's really hate. I think you just like it, and you just like it because you're frustrated. You have low, you know, frustration tolerance or something. And to be able to teach them how to start gauging that, because otherwise, I mean, it's a whole spectrum. Our emotions are a spectrum, and there are different scenarios and situations we're going to experience that are going to create, like, you might get frustrated, you know, at the grocery store by something. I'm just like, but that kind of feeling might be different than watching a news story where you see someone is really hurt. You know, it's helping them to figure out what that spectrum is.
I know the question I was going to ask you now. How do we instill empathy in our kids to know that, because you talked about that one kid that was having a problem with your son in T-ball, and instead of, you know, shutting down and completely isolating from the kid, you went and talked, you know, showing them empathy, because there may be something going on in somebody else's life that you don't know. Case in point, a couple of weeks ago, I was going to get my hair done, and it's 8:00 in the morning, and, you know, I'm driving the speed limit. You know, road rage is, my God, road rage is outrageous right now. And this person kept coming up behind me, like flying fast, and then going really slow, and then coming back up. And I'm like, I'm doing 5 over the speed limit. I'm technically breaking the law, but I'm still doing it. I go over a railroad track. I stop whenever, because I don't want to hit the railroad track, and get to the light, turn my blinker on, wait for the cars to go by. And then when they go by, because they're going to turn on to get in the highway, and I was going straight, the passenger yells out the window that I need to effing park my car because I didn't know how to drive, when in fact I was doing everything I was supposed to. And so I was like, and it shook me up to the point that, screaming for someone to lean their head out the car and start screaming. And then when the light turned green, and they had to wait because they couldn't turn, and I had to pass by them again, and she's still screaming in her car. And it just really shook me. And me and the anger in the past would have reacted immediately to this. But when I got to my hair appointment, and I was telling my hairdresser, and I'm like, if she's that miserable in her life at 8 o'clock in the morning, can you imagine what her life is like, period? I have to have empathy for her because I'm going to pray for her because, oh my gosh, that's a miserable life to have. And I don't want to have that life. So you kind of have to reflect on how you react to situations as well. So teaching empathy with kids to have, because my first reaction was about ready to, I did take my phone out and take a picture of the car, but other than that, just in case something else happened. So at least it was on the car, on the thing as protection, but still for people to think they're entitled to do whatever, and we're supposed to just lay down and let everybody walk all over us.
Exactly. Yes. And it's so true of this idea with the empathy coming with that reaction versus a response. And this is something over the last few years that I've really reflected on in my own life. How do you take a moment, realize that you're a little triggered, a little flooded with some emotion, and calm down a little bit and realize like someone else is also trying to get someplace. This is what always gets me too with like traffic stuff, where I'm like, we're all just trying to get someplace.
Yep.
But you're right. That is an extreme reaction to you just trying to drive to your hairdresser. Is like a very unnecessary reaction. And I think for kids, I think exactly teaching them their first thought or reaction is going to be to react, to have a big explosive, not an explosive, but to have some sort of big moment. And then to teach them, like, maybe take a breath, let your nervous system fire. I think so many people right now are just in that like intense survival. Everybody's like, not everybody, I can't say that, but I feel like just a lot of that frenzied energy, on edge, again, that personal blinders on. I need to get to where I need to go. For me, when it comes to empathy, I'm a big fan of saying that empathy, my definition, is understanding that you could make the same decision as someone else if you had the same information. And so really understanding that people have information, like for that woman, there was some information, like granted, probably could use some tips and tools to work through that. But I think teaching kids that is really helpful to help them stop and reflect on what they're doing. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the moment, but have an opportunity to teach. Again, guide them, teach them, hey, you had a really big reaction from this. Like, can we work through it? And obviously at age appropriate level to try and have them understand. Or if something happens with their friends, okay, can you maybe think about what might be going on for your friend when he said he didn't want to play with you? Or, whatever it is, to take a moment to try and put yourself in someone else's shoes.
And I think that's so hard because so people are caught up in the me mentality of everything. Well, how's it going to affect me? What's it going to do to me? And I applaud the fact that you live in a neighborhood that support each other, because it used to be in my neighborhood, it used to be like that, but not anymore. I mean, the neighbors don't even hardly know each other anymore. It's that bad because new people have moved in and they just kind of keep to themselves, or they only come to you when they want something from you.
Right.
Like, okay, so package was stolen off my steps. Did you see anybody go over to my house? Oh, well, this, and this, it's just, we have to learn to be community again and to support each other and to be one with each other instead of being so united instead of divided.
Yes. And I think a big part of this is finding people who are similar in the sense of wanting that sense of community. I'm not saying to find people who look like you necessarily or have the same political views, but see if you can find a group, because it is hard if you're in an environment where this isn't easy, or you're noticing that connection isn't there, to try and like step out of your house and be like, come on, neighbors, right? People probably flip you off and go, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? So I think being able to find a community of people where you can nurture that and take those steps to be able is a really good way to start, because it is kind of an uphill battle. because of the cultural climate and the political climate that we have right now. And people are trying to close doors and be like, I don't know if you're safe. I don't know if you're safe. And that's hard. And so I think, if it's through, I know I can say for me, it took me a while to find a community, and it finally worked out through my son's T-ball. And I was like, I'm starting to find people who have some of the same values. They don't look like us all the, and that's okay. But we can actually come together and try and like see what we can do to raise these kids with the empathy and not going to a place of hatred.
Yeah, that's so true. Our time is almost up. Can you believe it? I mean, we could talk like this for hours and hours and hours. I feel like we should do a monthly session or something, because I
love that.
We have such a great conversation with each other on each other's podcasts that well, people talk about your podcast, and then we'll kind of zoom off.
Yeah, of course. First of all, thank you so much. This is, again, has been lovely. I would love to connect more. I do have a podcast, Forward to Joy. It's on all the platforms. And really, my focus is on providing tools and strategies for individuals dealing with grief. It doesn't necessarily have to be from a loss by death, but any sort, we have loss and experiences throughout our lives. And so what can we do to come together again as a platform for community and be able to know that we're not alone?
And then you also have a website and your book, which I'll put in the show notes, and I also link in the show notes as well the previous episode you were on.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm excited. This was such a great conversation.
Yes. And I wish more people would be open to having these types of conversations, because I think our country would be very well run if these conversations that actually happen, instead of worried about what's in it for me, worry about what's in it for the whole.
Exactly. Or worrying about retaliation.
Ooh, yeah. That retaliation's big in my head right now.
I know. Yeah. It's hard to know, but I just appreciate you providing that platform and a safe environment to be able to have these conversations.
So guys, I will put in the show notes everywhere you can find Alexandria, as well as the book she mentioned, The Power of Showing Up. So yeah, I put it on the screen over here. And until next time, Alexandria, thank you for coming on and for sharing. Until next time, guys, be blessed and have empathy and think about what other people are going through, and lead with love, not hatred, and not divisiveness. We need to be sticking all this together. Bye.